Hey everyone, I'm Paul and today I'm installing a bike rack on my scooter. This will look really weird because this bike is just as big as the scooter. The idea is to have the rack somewhere back here and have the bike perhaps on this side. My plan is to weld some mounting hardware to the frame of the scooter, so everything will have to come off the back. The seat compartment is held in by 4 bolts. Removing this part will give me access to the engine. The handles are coming off next. You might have noticed this scooter isn't exactly stock. Chinese scooters are fun because you can modify them as much as you want without worrying about messing up something that was nice before. This round gas tank is pretty cool. I have a video about it. Actually, I have many videos about this scooter. Check my Chinese scooter playlist to see all the cool stuff I've done with it. I have a couple more bolts back here, and the seat release cable needs to come off too. Now the rear plastic fairing is ready to come off. Use a 12mm wrench to loosen up the throttle cable, then remove it from the carburetor. Loosen up the air intake clamp, then take 2 nuts off the intake manifold. Don't forget to unplug the idle enricher. Looks like my airbox has a broken bracket in front. This is normal for Chinese scooters. Now the carburetor is ready to come out. Let's get this weirdly shaped rear fender out of the way too. Now I'm moving the wiring harness out of the way. There's a starter wire, a ground on the valve cover, starter solenoid, and CDI here. Loosen the nut at the rear brake cable all the way, remove the bracket, and take the cable off the transmission. The rear shock bolts take 12 and 14mm wrenches. The engine has a long bolt going through it at the front. And that's it, the engine is out. I'm welding some 1 5/8 inch diameter galvanized fence posts to my scooter. This material is cheap and lightweight. It's also annoying to weld because it's thin and the galvanization makes the welder sputter a lot. I used 1 3/8 inch diameter fence top rail to fit inside the pieces I welded to the frame. The technique is to grind off as much of the zinc galvanization as you can and don't breathe any of it in when it burns. It's very toxic. The original fender doesn't fit anymore, so I'm replacing it with this stair tread liner. It was $5 at Home Depot. Okay, and here's my new fender. I used a bunch of zip ties to attach it to the frame, and I have the smooth side facing down. That makes it easier to clean. I reinstalled the carburetor and wiring, and the scooter is looking pretty good. On the left side, I installed a new bracket on my airbox, and now it's time to figure out the plastic fairing. I cut some giant holes in the sides for access to the rack mounting hardware. Let's put the seat compartment back in and reinstall some screws. The rack holder thing slides into the frame like this. I have 2 long bolts on each side that go all the way through the frame. The left side also gets a couple bolts. I'm using an older Yakima tray style rack that I got for free. It was part of a hitch mounted rack that got hit by a car. I saved the tray that didn't get bent. Now let's test fit the bike. This rack is nice because you don't have to take the bike apart. Just clamp the front tire, and that's a lot of weight hanging off the side of my scooter. And it's really hard to pick it back up. Okay, I should go ride it. I just got back from a test ride with the bike on the rack, and the scooter is definitely not balanced. It's much heavier on the right side, and when you're stopped and you lean over, it gets super heavy. But when I'm moving, it doesn't seem to be as much of a problem. The scooter needs a stand on the right side so it doesn't fall over when I load the bike. I welded this little thing together and it just bolts on. Let's test it. It seems to hold the scooter well. Alright, so that works great. It was actually easy to load the bike. The kickstand was stable enough that I could push down on the clamp real hard. No big deal. Picking it back up was easy. So this kickstand is perfect, right? Well, no. So if you're riding and you lean over far enough, it's possible it will hit the ground. And it's pretty solid. If you hit that, you're in for a bad time. This could be very dangerous. I think even though it works well, the kickstand of death is gonna have to come off. All right, so I still need a kickstand on the right side. This one is for a bicycle. I modified my foot peg mount and added a couple bolt holes so this can bolt up, and touched it up with the wrong paint from the store. Yeah, don't worry about that. Whoops, some people can't read. I will go back and try my luck again. Maybe I'll get the right paint. Now you might notice something weird. This kickstand is going forward instead of back, which is also technically quite dangerous if it comes down while you're riding. But they don't make right side kickstands. All kickstands are left side kickstands. So I asked Google why, and turns out most people are right-handed and your sword goes on the left. When you mount a horse, you get on from the left side so that your sword isn't awkwardly in the way. And that's always carried over to motorcycles. You always get on the motorcycle from the left, so there's no reason to have a kickstand on the wrong side. Now let's try the new kickstand. Lean it to the right, then load the bike. That actually works great. It's not quite as sturdy as this kickstand of death, but I think it's a lot safer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, why don't you just put the bike on the left side and then you don't have this problem? Well, some people are not that smart. On the left side of the scooter, I'll be installing a cargo box using this fancy blue bracket that I made out of plywood and right angle shelving brackets. The cargo box is held on with 2 bolts going all the way through the frame. The rear bracket pinches the frame above and below. That box is very sturdy. I'm loading my hydration pack and a bunch of other random shit I won't use. Nobody does yoga while mountain biking, and those skates will fall out of there. I'm really stoked on this build. This box is awesome. And notice, it's standing on the regular kickstand and not leaning over to the right because I have this White Claw in here counterbalancing my bike. Now the bike plus the rack is almost 40 pounds of weight hanging off 1 foot to the right of the scooter. This box is less than a foot away, so theoretically if I want it to be perfectly balanced, I would need to put more than 40 pounds in here. So like completely full of beer or something. And that's not a huge concern because it's still less weight than having a passenger on the back. So it's pretty much perfect, right? Well, there is one more thing I can improve. The biggest problem here, of course, is balance. I need clearance between the bike and the handlebar, and I need room to put my foot down, but there's no reason this part of the bike should be so far from the scooter. The front of the rack is right where I want it, but the back can be tucked in to where it's almost touching the bumper. Let's start with some measurements. The front of the rack is 11 inches away from the floor. The back of the rack is 7 inches away from the bumper. This is the ruler even with the edge of the rack. I'll mark that on the bracket. This ruler represents where I want the edge of the tray to be. I want the front to stay in the same place, and I want the back to be 6 inches closer to the scooter. I need to cut 3¼ inches off the front and 4 inches off the back. If you look closely, I'm not cutting on the lines I drew earlier. I moved the marks over 1 inch to leave room for some couplers. These are some long pieces I'm removing. The center of gravity will be much closer to, well, the center. The front of the rack is still 11 inches away from the floor. I'm using a jack to make sure the tray is level with the floor of the scooter, and the back is much closer to the bumper now. I put some Fend's top rail couplers over the parts that I cut, and now I'm welding it back together. Before I finish welding, let's test fit the bike. The handlebar's still clear. I have leg room. This is good. I made another trip to the store, this time with my reading cap on, and I was able to decipher those confusing words that tell you what color the paint is. I still use that stupid blue paint on the bike rack because I have a lot of it, and this is supposed to be a low-budget, don't-go-to-the-store project. The rack just slides into the scooter like this. I made sure it's a bit tight so it doesn't wobble around. 2 bolts hold the right side. I timed myself, and installing the rack and box on the scooter takes about 2 minutes. I can take them back off in 54 seconds. Look how cool this guy is. He has a scooter with a mountain bike. Everyone is jealous. I'm kind of joking, but not really. A lot of people stare when I ride this thing around town. The scooter does feel a bit more balanced than before. I didn't have to lean as much to the left to compensate for the bike. And now it's time for me to scoot off into the sunset. Bye! I did that last test ride with an empty case, and the handling was just fine. If you want to install a bike rack on your scooter, feel free to copy this design or come up with your own. And keep in mind, if it doesn't work right the first time, just make adjustments until it does. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.